So in this video today guys, I will go over how to use Figma Constraints so you can create a more responsive and adaptive UI designs. Now this will be a 2-video series, and in this video I will only show you how to use constraints, and in the second video I will also give you a plugin called Breakpoint, and I will show you how to use that plugin so that you can create websites like this one on Figma where it is actually scaling and it has breakpoints, etc. Now, without further ado, let's start with an overview for the Figma constraints. Let's get started with our overview, and I'm going to zoom in the shift to a frame called overview, and I'm going to put here a circle. So with the shortcut O, I'm going to give it 48 pixels, 48 pixels. And right now, when you put an element to a frame on Figma, you can see these top dashed dots going from the top of the element circle and then to its left. And the reason for it is anytime you are putting an element on Figma into a frame, what Figma does is it automatically gives it a top constraint and a left constraint. And what this means is basically, when you give a constraint with top and left, what you are telling Figma is that I want to keep the position of this circle relative to its parent frame in terms of the top and the left. And here's what that means. If we were to grow it to the right side, nothing changes. But if I were to actually change the width of this parent frame overview to the left, you see that the circle actually follows. It is following it because it actually wants to keep this pixels of 165 to the left and 88 pixels to the top, meaning if I were to grow it up, it is still 88 pixels to the top, and if I were to grow it to left, it is still 165 pixels to the left. Okay, so where is this actually useful to us? Now, it is actually useful to us in many different scenarios. Like, let's say we would create a navigation bar, and if we do that for the mobile and we want to scale it for desktop, it is much more easier to do with constraints because it will just follow. It will it will grow or shrink depending on how we set it. So let me show you a bit more different examples with the circle. So if you can see right now, I am still, no matter where I'm moving, whether center or not, it's only doing for the left and top. It's not gonna change anything regarding the circle. The circle will not follow for bottom or right. As you can see here, it's not, but if it is for top, it is. So one thing you can do is this. You can say, I want it to follow the right, and then it will follow it to the right, but now it will not follow it to the left. Now, Ahmed, what would happen if for horizontally, I want it to actually be left and right? And that is when things get a bit more complicated. So let's say left and right. So I'm gonna go here, left and right. So Ahmed, if I'm growing in one direction and I'm trying to actually make sure that my element keeps its distance from left and right, how would that work? Basically, Figma grows the element to compensate for this. Because if you want to keep the left position and the right position, but the right side is the one that is growing, you want to grow the element because you want the initial left and right margins to be the same. So I'm going to show you. It's 275, and let's center this. It's 273 to 272. And if I were to grow it to the right, it is still 273 to 272. So Figma, basically when you pick horizontally left and right, and you are growing on one side, which is how you are growing elements, let's say you are going from mobile to desktop, or let's say you are going from desktop to mobile, how you are shrinking the elements is usually shrinking from one side or growing at one side, is Figma will actually scale your elements, not scale, but increase its width to actually still maintain the left and right margins. And it will also do this if you were to pick top and bottom options. So let's see. My initial margins are 165 to 164. And if I were to grow it by top, see how my element is now growing vertically. It is still 165 to 164. And that is the general constraints we use. For horizontal, we have left, right, left and right. I haven't shown you center yet. I think I will. But before showing you center, I want to show you something that is called scale. Because scale and left and right and top and bottom are often confused. So to do that, I'm gonna actually delete this. Gonna do another one, 60, 60. And to duplicate it, I'm gonna press Option. Okay, so with one of these elements, I am gonna make it go left and right, top and bottom. And with another element, I'm gonna go scale and scale. Now, this part is very important. What I want you to understand is, I'm gonna horizontally center, yes. And I'm gonna do the same with this one. So this one is the left and right constraint, and this one is for horizontal only scale. Now, what is the difference between these two values? I want you to pay specific attention to the left and right margin, and that is 307 pixels for both of them. Now, I'm going to my parent frame, and I'm gonna increase its size to, let's say, double, so that should be 313.48. All right, what happened? So if you remember the initial margins, the left and right one actually protected the margins by growing the element we have. But what the scale did is, it grew just a bit, but it actually grew the margins as well. When you pick scale, what Figma does is basically determines the position of the element not relative to the margins left and right in terms of pixels, but by the percentage. Meaning, instead of seeing it like 307 pixels left and right, as in like the initial position, it sees that, okay, so the left and right margins are roughly 50% of the parent frame. And if you increase the parent frame to 2x width, it will still try to keep that margin left 50%, margin right 50%. What this does is, your element loses its shape way slower because we are using percentages instead of fixed values when determining the left and right positioning of the element. All right, so now that we are also done with the scale, what I can show you is the center, and for that we will need one element here. So I'm gonna show you. Let's do center, and let's do center as well. Basically, Figma will keep the element's position wherever you try to grow. It will always be centered. That's very easy to understand. Now, that is the overview. In the next video, we will go over and actually design our navigation top menu to make you understand how useful constraints are. So we are going to begin by designing the navigation. So for that reason, I'm going to press F to create a frame. And this will be desktop nav. And let's give it a width of 1440. So my mistake. Let's give it a width of 1440 pixels, which is the standard desktop width. And then I'm gonna maybe make it a bit larger, and I'm gonna give it a color of, let's say, something around here. And then I'm gonna press F again to create the frame for our navigation. Gonna give it the same width as the desktop width, which is 1440. Then I make it go x0, so it starts and ends inside the parent frame. And then I'm gonna give this a color of, let's say, the parent, but just a bit darker. Yeah, just a bit darker. Then I'm gonna press T for text, and I'm gonna say, let's say, company logo. And I'm not gonna design a logo, I'm just gonna increase the size. I'm holding shift to increase by 8. And I'm gonna do this auto width, and again, just get the last and part bolded, yes. And okay, so then what I'm going to do, and maybe make this go 68. Yeah, that looks better. And maybe give it a left margin of 67, maybe 48. Yes, that looks pretty good. Maybe even 96. Yeah. And then what we can do is we can copy and paste this by pressing Option and dragging it. And then I'm gonna unbold it and I'm gonna say, let's say home. And I'm gonna give this left 20 is pretty good. I'm gonna make this home, about, contact. And I'm gonna select all these three elements and make them a frame called links. And I will name the parent frame as top nav. Okay, so that is pretty good. So right now we are here, and so the company logo, and because it's an element that is inside the frame, is already constraint is left top, and for the page links it is also left top. But we are at a situation where you will be, actually it will occur many times where we have the most parent frame is our desktop, right? It's the desktop element 1440. Then we have another frame inside it, which is our navigation. Then inside this navigation, we have another frame, which is the page links. So to actually begin working on our constraints, we want to do a top to bottom approach, start with the parent and then move to the children. So what I want is right now is this. Let's see how it's working right now. Nothing is responding, right? And because our parent nav is also left and top constraint to the desktop navigation, right? The main frame, while it is growing on the left side, it is working, but it is when it's growing on the right side, it is not following up. So one thing to actually change that is we wanted to basically keep at the edges in the left and the right side, and probably also top. So what we can do for the top nav element is we can say left and right, and this will actually make it keep scaling and keeping itself to the edges of the main frame, even if it grows or shrinks. So even if we are shrinking, we will grow. But that means we still have this problem. So when I'm scaling down from the left side, because the company logo inside the top nav is left and top, it is protecting its position. But we cannot say that actually for the page links, because they are also top and left, but we are gonna, if we scale from the right side, which is how we are gonna scale for most of our elements, it's, it's not actually responding. And the solution for that is, and again, pause the video and answer what should we do. And the solution for that is actually to give it a right one. So when it scales down, it will protect itself. Now, we should, before we actually do this, we should also make sure the margin is correct. So maybe get that to 48 as well, or 96. And voila, that is your top navigation. And that is now scalable. Now, this will not protect it forever. Like you can see around here, we need a breakpoint to turn into a different device, because now the company logo and the page links are getting too close. We probably want to change the page links into a hamburger menu. And all of these breakpoints and how to do them with a plugin will be covered in the next video. Meaning that in the next lesson, not video for this one, but I will put a separate video in terms of a tutorial to how to use the constraints and plugins. And okay, so let's move on to the form design. All right, so let's move on to designing our form. And in order to do that, I'm gonna press F to create a frame. Gonna give it width of 1440 again. And let's say this much of it is okay. I'm gonna do the shortcut Ctrl C to pick a color. And that's good. And then I'm gonna press F again to create my frame for my form. I'm gonna give this a fill color, and I'm gonna press Ctrl C again, and I'm gonna pick that color. Okay. So this actually is going to be our form. And the thing I want to show you, and let's also copy our desktop now from that frame to here, and let's do this form. So what I wanna put inside this form is a headline. So sign up today, auto width, maybe 32 pixels. And Carla might not look that good, so maybe I can go for Open Sans. Bold, yes, that looks okay. And I am gonna go here. That's roughly good. And yeah, and maybe 24 pixel top. And then what I'm going to do is I'm gonna add my input field for name and email and then a subscribe button. So I'm gonna press F again. And I am gonna give this a fill, Shift X to turn it into a stroke. And that looks good. And I'm gonna press T and I'm gonna write name here. I'm gonna get this to be 18 maybe. And I don't want it to be bolded, so. All right, and auto width, and that is pretty good. Roughly here, I'm gonna zoom in to find out on the top of the font you have 6 pixels. On the bottom, I believe you have 6 as well. That is pretty centered then, so it should be like 9.5. Perfect. And I'm gonna name this as name field. And I'm gonna drag it with by holding options to duplicate. And I'm gonna name this email. And I'm gonna drag this one, and this will be our subscribe button. So I'm gonna give an auto layout for this one. And I am actually gonna make this space between, carry it till here, centered. Yes, that looks pretty good. And I'm gonna name this subscribe. Okay, and I'm gonna give this the fill color of the background. And yeah, that, and I'm gonna Shift X to switch, and that looks pretty good. Okay, maybe give some border radius. So, and again, because we inserted this element into a parent frame, it already got the constraints that are automatically top and left. And so when we actually resize, it will protect where it is by keeping where it is. And if we were to resize from the left side, it would follow. And for the form element, I think that is pretty okay. You probably won't do it for the left, but just to show you how we could do it for the right side, let's say it's here, and we would have to do the same thing that we did for the page links, that so that if we are resizing from the right side, to keep its distance on the right, we actually want this to be to the right. And now it would protect itself. I'm just gonna align it near the, yes, this would work. Just gonna get my ruler with Shift R, see if our alignment is good, and it is good. And that is the form design, guys. Maybe this doesn't need to be that big. E24, yeah. I think that looks better, yeah. And you can always space these elements by saying you can give a auto layout to the parent, and you can distance things like 24, and you can basically make everything 32, 32, 32, my bad, 32, and yeah, maybe give this 8, and that looks better. Yeah, and that is for the form, and now we can actually move on to the model in the next video. So let's design our final element, which will be a model. So I'm gonna press F again to create a desktop frame, 1440. Let's give it a height of 800 pixels. And I'm gonna press Ctrl C to pick a color. And I'm gonna drag the navbar here as well. And okay, so navbar did not follow, so maybe get it to here, and that looks great. So what I want to do now is this. I want to create a new model probably at the center of the screen. If you are designing a model and it's overlaying, you probably do not want to have a left alignment or right alignment. You can either put it on top of the navbar if it's a very small model, or usually you put it in the center around here. So in order to do that, I'm gonna press F, and I'm gonna give it a fill, let's say white. I don't like white. I'm gonna press Ctrl C, pick the color of the navbar, that's better, 8 pixel border radius, and I'm gonna maybe title this Are You Sure? And auto width, and probably bolded, and I want this to be 3232. And then I am actually looking for some lorem ipsum text to explain the problem, but I don't want to write it down. So I'm gonna press Command/. So I'm gonna press Command/ so I can search for my plugins, and I want the plugin for lorem ipsum. It's a great plugin, and if you guys don't have it and you want to learn more of the plugins on Figma that will save you time, please click on the card that is now showing on top. I believe that video will give you 10 to 15 plugins that will save your time a lot as a UI UX designer. I'm gonna give this maybe 2 sentences. I definitely do not want auto width because it's too long, and I don't want this to be, yeah, that's better, and that's pretty good actually. I will give this here, and then what I want is I want buttons, so I want to do F, and I want the height to be 36 pixels, let's say, around here T, which would be, let's say, delete, or let's say download, auto width, and I want the frame to be bigger maybe, centered here, and I want this to actually be auto layout, so we can center it better, content to be centered, that's good. Maybe 35 pixels is good for the radius of 4, and I want to give this the color of the main background there, so I want this to be Ctrl C. I want to press on the frame, Ctrl C to pick a color, and boom, that is pretty good. Maybe a bit more in the top and bottom because it looks too small. Yeah, that even maybe 10. So that's the download one, and this is gonna be the, let's say, cancel. And I'm going to make a Shift X so that it shifts the filled stroke, and I'm gonna check my alignment. I want this to be at 32 and maybe 16 pixels. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And I want to give an auto layout to the parent frame as well. and I want the distance of each element to be 16, and I want to frame these two buttons, and I want to give a vertical, and yeah, that works pretty good. If you don't understand how I'm using Autolayout to basically pick the positioning of the elements, you probably should watch my Autolayout video that is coming on top. That video will give you basically a very good guide on how to master the Autolayout so you can do tricks like these with relative ease. And this looks pretty good, I think. So okay, so now that we styled the model, what we have to do now is position it. So right now, because it's a, let's say, model desktop, now because it's a frame, Figma, like I told you in the overview section of this video, Figma, whenever you place a frame or an element inside a frame, which is our model desktop parent frame, it gives us a constraint of top and left. What that means is if you were to go over to the left side, the left margin of the model would still be constant. It would still be here, 518. But if we were to grow on the right side, it would not keep the 634 pixels here, and I will show you. Right? So to actually make it keep the left and right and top and bottom, what do you think, which constraint value we should use? And I am waiting for your answer. And it should be left. So it should be actually centered. So the moment it's centered, no matter if I'm going from left or right, it will always keep the element at the center. Doesn't matter the left and right margins, right? Those will change. The point is to keep the element at the center. And that's why we use centered, and that is the model, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. And yeah, that's, I think, a good basics introduction for the constraints for Figma to create better responsive designs. Now, before you go any further, I actually added 2 videos to the end of this video that I believe will help make you a better UI UX designer on Figma. Please watch either of them if you haven't already. I believe they will improve your design skills a lot.